Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us. Our extraordinary NHS has now succeeded in vaccinating more than 17.7 million people across the UK, and nearly a year after this pandemic began, this unparalleled national effort has decisively shifted the odds in our favour, so that we no longer have to rely simply on lockdowns and restricting our behaviour and putting our lives on hold. But with every day that goes by, this programme of vaccination is creating a shield around the entire population, which means that we're now travelling on a one-way road to freedom, and we can begin safely to restart our lives and do it with confidence. And I want to be frank about exactly what that means and the trade-offs involved. The vaccines reduce the danger of COVID, they save lives, and they keep people out of hospital. But no vaccine against any disease has ever been 100% effective. So whenever we ease the lockdown, whether it's today or in 6 or 9 months, we've got to be realistic and accept that there will be more infections, more hospitalizations, and therefore, sadly, more deaths, just as there are every year with flu. Even if we sustain the lockdown indefinitely, which would itself cost lives and do immeasurable harm to our children, we would not be able to eradicate this disease. And that's why it's right gradually to replace the protection afforded by the lockdown with the protection of the vaccines. And our approach is to move with the utmost care and advancing in 4 steps, each with a minimum of 5 weeks apart, so we can properly judge the impact of each relaxation before we move on. And you can see the details of all of this on gov.uk. We'll be led at every stage by data, not dates, and we will apply 4 tests: the pace of the vaccination programme, the effectiveness of the vaccines, the pressure on the NHS, and the risks of any new variants of COVID. And therefore, as we look at the data today, I can confirm that 2 weeks from today, Monday the 8th of March, we will begin step 1. And schools and colleges across England will reopen and teaching in classrooms can start again. All the evidence shows that schools are safe and the risk posed to children by COVID is vanishingly small. But to offer even greater reassurance, we're introducing twice-weekly testing of secondary school and college pupils and asking them to wear face coverings for the rest of this term. Students on practical courses can return to university, but all others will need to continue learning online, and will review the situation before the end of the Easter holidays. We will allow breakfast and after-school clubs to restart, and among other changes, on March the 8th, you'll be able to have a coffee on a bench or a picnic in a park with one person outside your household. And because we know how stressful this time has been and how people yearn to see friends and family, if only fleetingly, we will now go further. And on the 29th of March, you can meet more of your friends and family outside, including in gardens, either as 2 households or subject to the rule of 6. And then we'll go on to step 2, which is no earlier than the 12th of April. And this is a big moment because shops will return and reopen, hairdressers, nail salons will reopen, pubs and restaurants will all be able to serve customers outside, precisely because we know that outside the risk of transmission is lower. And then 5 weeks after that, no earlier than May the 17th, we'll go to step 3 and open all our hospitality sector to service indoors, pubs, bars, restaurants, along with hotels and cinemas. And subject to capacity limits, we will also open sports stadia, concert halls and theatres. And finally, provided we continue to pass the 4 tests, then from the 21st of June, we will go to step 4 and say goodbye to most remaining restrictions, resuming large-scale events like business conferences and football matches, lifting the limits on weddings and reopening nightclubs. All of these steps will apply in England, and the government will continue to do whatever it takes to protect jobs and livelihoods across our whole United Kingdom for the duration of the pandemic. And I know there are some who would like to accelerate the timetable. I know, of course, there are others who would like to be more cautious and stay in the slow lane. And I understand both points of view, and I sympathise, because levels of infection are still high, and we must strike a very careful balance and always accept that we've got to be humble in the face of nature. But also, we must accept that we cannot persist indefinitely with restrictions that have separated families and loved ones for too long, threatened the livelihoods of millions, kept pupils out of school. It's thanks to the rollout of these vaccinations, many of them pioneered in this country, that the balance of that judgment is now changing in our favour. And thanks to the vaccinations, that there is light ahead, leading us to a spring and a summer, which I think will be seasons of hope, looking and feeling incomparably better for us all, and from which we will not go back. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Chris to do the slide.
Thank you, Prime Minister. First slide, please. This slide, which is familiar, I think, to anyone who's watched these press conferences, shows the number of people testing positive for COVID-19 in the UK. And as you can see, there are essentially two things to take away from this. The first of which is that the number testing positive has fallen and is continuing to fall. But the second is that the rates are still very high at over 11,000 cases on a 7-day average rolling basis. Next slide, please. Similarly, when we look at number of people in hospital with COVID in the UK, again, you can see there is a significant fall that is continuing, but the rates are still high, and they're only slightly below the height of the first peak we had last year. So definitely things are heading in the right way, but remain at a high level. Next slide, please. And then if we look at the number of people who have sadly died with following a positive test result for COVID-19, these are also falling, and the most recent 7-day average is 480 deaths a day. So still high, but falling and falling steadily at this point in time. Next slide, please. Now, all of the things we've seen so far largely are done, or probably almost entirely are done, due to the activities of the general public in the UK, in all 4 nations of the UK, staying at home and following the lockdown guidelines. But we have had this really extraordinary rollout of vaccination across all 4 nations of the UK, and you can see in this graph that this line is continuing to go up steadily, day on day. Next slide, please. So I've just wanted to talk a little bit about what we would expect the impact of this to be. And the Prime Minister has also asked me to talk a bit about the results of 3 studies that were released today from England and from Scotland. So the first thing in this slide to say is that the great majority, well over 90%, nearer 99% of those who sadly die of COVID are in the groups, the JCVI, Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation groups, 1 to 9. And they're in the dark blue, and this is a study of people in hospitals in the UK. And the largest group of those, 86%, are people who are in groups 1 to 4. These are people who are over the age of 70. And at this stage, we have vaccinated the great majority of people in those groups, including in care and nursing homes, who wish to be vaccinated, a very, very high proportion. So we anticipate that if the vaccines are effective, we would anticipate the death rate will now start to fall, not just because of people staying home and obeying the lockdown guidance and instructions, which people are to an extraordinary degree, but also because of the effects of vaccination, because people have now had these vaccines. We're now on the middle bar, which is people in groups ages 50 to 69, already going very rapidly through those over the age of 65, and people who have significant health problems who are under 65, but who we want to accelerate the period by which they're vaccinated. So they too are being vaccinated early on. So this will lead to a significant further reduction in the risks of people dying. And this also includes a significant number of people who are then hospitalised, who are not in the first four groups. But there are people who get severe disease and are hospitalised under the age of 50. And it's important to understand that we must not leave them behind in vaccination because there are still severe cases in people who otherwise have no other health problems, as well as people who've got predictable health problems in hospitals across the UK under the age of 50. Next slide, please. So my final slide is just to make that point in a different way. And these are data looking at the proportion of people admitted to hospital with COVID-19 by age here in England. And what you can see is people over the age of 65, a great majority of whom have now been vaccinated, make up 58% of those people, but people under 65 make up a very substantial 42%. So there's a lot of people who would, if they got COVID, might go on to develop severe disease and go into hospital, still unvaccinated. And we have quite a way to go in all four nations of the UK, but making very fast progress. Now, how effective are these vaccines? And that's a question which we said we think they're effective. Trials are very good to date. What was released today, both in England and in Scotland, were 3 studies which tried to address this problem. And this is what the Prime Minister asked me to try to lay out. The first of them is a study done called the Siren study that was done in people who are healthcare workers, so young adults under the age of 65. And what that showed is that at 21 days, there was a 72% reduction of the effectiveness of the vaccine, but the vaccine led to a 72% reduction in the number of people who developed an infection, even a mild infection, at 21 days after just 1 dose of the vaccine, and this increased further to 86% if they had a second dose. So that's extremely good protection just from mild infection. Now, obviously, you have to have mild infection to go on to get severe disease. And then the second study, which is an important additional piece of information from Public Health England, showed that you've got significant protection also in older people, including people over the age of 80, so over 55 or 55% protection just from getting mild disease at 35 days. But if people got an infection, there was a further reduction of around 50% in them having severe disease and therefore going to hospital. So if you put them together, you obviously won't get into hospital if you don't get disease at all, and then you have a further 50% reduction. So we are confident from these data that the effectiveness of this vaccine in older people in reducing hospitalizations is greater than 75%. The exact number will change as the data comes in, but we are confident that this is going to be the case. And this is backed up by a third study that was released from Scotland, and that looked at both the Pfizer vaccine, which is the data I've shown from the UK so far, and the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And the headline numbers they report, and to be clear, I think these will change a bit over time, but the headlines that they report is that the probability of the vaccines reducing your chance of going to hospital, so that's made up of reducing the risk of infection and then reducing the risk of severe disease, both of them together, was 85% for the Pfizer vaccine and over 90% for the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. And that vaccine effectiveness remained in those who were 80 years old. So this tells us 3 things. The first one is these vaccines, both the vaccines being used in the UK, provide a very substantial level of protection from the first dose. And in fact, the great majority of protection is from the first dose. So very important people get their vaccination. Secondly, the data suggests that protection continues over a prolonged period beyond 21 days. So this is, I think, supportive of, it doesn't prove it's exactly right, it's supportive of are delaying the second dose. But importantly, the third thing it shows is that we must make sure that those who've had a first vaccine go on to get their second vaccine. Final thing that Prime Minister asked me to talk about was the delay of 5 weeks between the different stages between the different stages as they're rolled out, the next phases of the roadmap that the Prime Minister announced to Parliament today. And the reason for that is that inevitably, for each one of these steps, we are taking a risk, which is an accepted risk. There is a risk to this. Everybody in the country, I'm sure, understands this. And what we want to do is, after each set of risks with a particular set of opening up, wait until we have data that tells us, has this done what we expected it to do? Have we actually ended up in a slightly worse place than we thought we would? Or have indeed we ended up in a slightly better place? But I think the big worry is, have things got slightly worse than we were expecting? And we cannot measure that in less than about 4 weeks, because it takes that long for the effect to be seen and the data to come through and be analysed. So that's the reason for the 5-week gap, because it allows us to see whether it's had an effect and then to make a judgment as to whether that's material to making the next decision. That's the basis on which this is done. But I think I would like to re-stress what I said at the beginning on the first slide. There are still very significant numbers of people with infections every day in the UK. There are still a lot of people in hospital with this disease. This is not the end, but this is the point where we can have a steady, risk-based, data-driven opening up. But everybody must stick to the guidelines as they go through the different stages. Because if we don't do that, then we will get to a stage where the rates go up very high, and you'll find there are people who are not protected by the vaccination. These are not 100% effective, as the Prime Minister said. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Chris. Patrick, anything to...
No, I completely agree with that, and the caution of going every 5 weeks is very important, because we need to measure so that we're not flying blind on this. We need to know what the impact of the opening up steps are.
Thanks very much. Let's go to David from Cardiff.
The vaccine rollout is going really well, but people will soon start to require their second dose of the vaccine. What is the government's plan for incorporating these second doses into the vaccine rollout? Will you need to cut back on the first doses being given, or will the vaccination programme be expanded even further, and how?
David, you asking a very important question. We've got to make sure that we have the supply in place for everybody to get their second vaccination within 12 weeks, as well as giving every adult, as we've said already, a vaccination by the end of July. And we do believe we have the supplies in place to keep up that rhythm and that timetable. And obviously, we're looking the whole time to source more where we can from our suppliers, according to the contracts that we've already signed. But that's basically the plan, David. I think that will do you. Let's go to Rachel from London.
The WHO has called on countries to ensure an equitable vaccine rollout. This is not only the fair thing to do, it's also safer, so we ensure we give the virus less opportunities to evolve and fewer strains develop. Will the UK commit to ensuring a fair and equitable vaccine rollout and distribution once, for instance, our top 9 priority groups have been vaccinated?
Yes, Rachel, it's very important that the UK will continue to support vaccine rollout across the whole world. That's why we've invested in the COVAX vaccination programme. Forgive me, we're one of the biggest donors in the world to COVAX. And as you rightly say, there's no point in having a vaccination programme that is simply confined to one country. It's a global pandemic. We need a global vaccination programme. Anything to add, Chris? Thank you very much. Let's go to Laura Koonsberg of the BBC.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. There has been progress today, but there will be some rules in place for another 4 months. When do you really hope to be able to say to the public, it's over? And Professor Whitty or Sir Patrick Vallance, it's been acknowledged very openly today by the government that more deaths will come as a result of lifting restrictions. And I know you won't want to put specific numbers on that, but can you warn the public what kind of numbers they should be prepared for, because even one of the optimistic suggestions is around 30,000 more deaths as a result of lifting the rules. And while the vaccine program's been remarkable, government documents today suggest 66% of people will be covered, only about